Hey Mustangs, now that we know what bacteria are and how they make us sick, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can stay safe when it comes to bacteria. We're going to take a look at preventions, ways to kind of stay away from bacteria, protect ourselves in that way, cures once you get a bacteria, and then uses. We'll try to end on a positive note and see how humans actually use bacteria. So first thing in looking at prevention, because bacteria reproduce so quickly, one of the best ways to protect ourselves away from bacteria is going to be to control bacteria growth. So these are three major ways that we protect ourselves from bacteria and prevent ourselves from getting bacteria. The first being sterilization. Bacteria are cells. So when we sterilize things, when we heat things up to a high enough temperature, it destroys them. Just like as if you were to put your hand into that boiling water, your cells would be destroyed. Same thing for bacteria. So extremely high temperatures can actually break bacteria apart and kill and destroy them. So that's one way we can stay safe. That's why we actually cook our foods. When you cook your food, you're heating it up to a temperature that is high enough that most bacteria can't survive. There are a few exceptions. Remember those bacteria that we saw that live near ocean floor vents and in hot springs and stuff like that. So some bacteria can survive, but for the most part, most can't. So sterilization, heating up, kills bacteria. If the bacteria is dead, it's not going to harm you. Disinfectants. So we've actually found some chemicals that can be used to destroy bacteria. So we spray down surfaces, wipe down surfaces, and with those liquids or wipes, they contain chemicals that actually kill the bacteria cells. So that's another way we can stay safe against bacteria. And then food processing. We keep our food in the refrigerator for a reason. Colder temperatures slow down binary fission. So the bacteria can't grow, make a copy of DNA and split in two very well in cold temperatures. So cold temperatures, cooler temperatures slow down binary fission. Doesn't stop them completely though. Doesn't stop it completely. How do we know this? We know that if we leave food in a refrigerator for too long, it's gonna go bad. The bacteria, the fungus will eventually get to it, but the cold temperatures of our refrigerators slow their reproduction down enough and keep us safe from bacteria. And then also with food processing, we see canning. So canning is something that kind of revolutionized food for humans here. We heat up the food to a high enough temperature to kill bacteria, so sterilization, and then we seal it. So that way there's no living bacteria in there. And the food actually stays for longer because there's no bacteria trapped in there. We've killed everything. All that's in that can is the food. If you ever see a can that's been dented and bloated, that means that dent caused a crack in the outside of that can and bacteria got in. Do not eat that food. Life lesson right there. So never ever eat canned food where the can is swelling because bacteria has gotten in and they've actually produced gases, and that's what causes the can to swell. So these are three ways: sterilization, disinfectant, and food processing that keep ourselves safe. If bacteria can't get into our body, then it can't harm us. The major ways that it does get into our body are usually our eyes, our nose, and our mouth. Okay? And then talking about food here that we see in these examples, it's through our mouth. Okay? Biggest obvious way to stay safe, of course, is washing your hands. If you wash your hands, the soap helps trap the bacteria, and then you simply rinse them down the sink. And then a really, really important thing is social responsibility. It's really old school to cough or sneeze into your hand like this, because if you do that, no one gets up and goes and washes their hands and gets them all clean. We wind up touching surfaces and that spreads bacteria. So social responsibility there, don't do it that way. We know that you're supposed to cough or sneeze into your arm like this or the crook of your elbow here. That is the best way to prevent, because a sneeze, and you can see this isn't exaggerated. When you actually use slow motion capture to watch someone sneeze, this is what it looks like. Okay? So all of that stuff gets spread and you're spreading that way. When you cough or sneeze like this though, it traps it, and you don't go around hugging people and shaking their hands like this with this part of your arm. So it's a much safer, more social responsible way to prevent the spread of sickness in this case. If you're not spreading it to other people, the bacteria doesn't have new hosts to take advantage of and make them sick as well. And finally, for prevention is vaccines. I'm going to do a real quick crash course here for vaccines. A vaccine, basically when you look at that liquid that is in the needle that's getting injected into you there, you have dead or weakened forms of the bacteria or parts of the bacteria in there. They get injected into you and it shows your immune system what the real bacteria looks like. your immune system actually gets ready to fight the real bacteria. So later on in life, if you do get exposed to the real bacteria, not the dead or weakened forms or parts of it, but the actual bacteria itself, your immune system is ready to go and it attacks and destroys it right away. So that's what a vaccine does. It gets your immune system ready to attack and destroy the real bacteria, and we're even going to see viruses as well. Okay, so that's the point of vaccines, to get your immune system ready to fight. Cures. Big idea here. So antibiotics are cures for bacterial infections only. Antibiotics do not work on viruses. So I'll say that again. Antibiotics do not work on viruses. Antibiotics only work on bacteria. And when you look at an antibiotic, it can be a liquid form, pill form. It contains chemicals or molecules that disrupt and destroy bacteria. So those molecules get in and they might prevent protein synthesis. They might prevent the bacteria from being able to transport stuff in and out of its cell membrane. So that's how antibiotics work, but they only work against bacteria. Antibiotics will not work on viruses. Along with antibiotics comes antibiotics resistance. So antibiotics resistance is actually an example of natural selection or evolution here. Some bacteria mutate and their DNA allows them to create certain enzymes or proteins so that way they can't be destroyed by the antibiotic. So some bacteria can't be killed, can't be destroyed by the antibiotics. Okay? And what that does is it helps that bacteria, but because of genetic recombination that we learned about earlier, it allows bacteria to transfer this antibiotic resistance here. So here we see conjugation. One bacteria that has the instructions to protect itself against a certain antibiotic, they're passing it to another bacteria. Okay? So here's basically what happens. If we look here, all the yellow are bacteria that can be killed by the antibiotics. The blue is bacteria that can't be killed. When we take an antibiotic, we kill all the bacteria that can. So all the bacteria that can be killed are dead, leaving only the ones that can't, and then they reproduce. Antibiotics resistance has become a problem because primarily of overuse of antibiotics. People take antibiotics when they don't actually need it. And what that does is it creates more bacteria that can't be killed. If we were wiser about how we take antibiotics, if people who really need antibiotics were the only ones that take it, we wouldn't be having the problem we have now with antibiotics resistance. On the news, whenever you hear about a superbug and stuff like that, they're talking about a bacteria that can no longer be killed by the antibiotics that we have created to this point. As scientists are always trying to create new antibiotics, but you have to be really careful. You want to create a molecule that will destroy and disrupt bacteria and not affect human cells in the process. So antibiotics, it's a challenge to create a molecule or chemical that does that. So by overusing these antibiotics, taking them when we don't need them, I mean, think about it. Sometimes people go to the doctors and expect and demand that they give them antibiotics. Most of the cases where we have a bacterial infection, our immune system will eventually fight it off. Not all, but most. So if we were smart about it and we didn't go and get it for unnecessary bacterial infections where our immune system would eventually fight it off, we wouldn't be having the problem we are right now with antibiotics resistance. So it's about making wise decisions. And even doctors were a part of this problem. Doctors used to actually prescribe antibiotics because, and not all doctors, I have to be very clear on this, not all doctors, make some money. Whenever a doctor would write a prescription, they would make money from that, from the pharmaceutical companies. So some doctors unethically wrote prescriptions for antibiotics and made money off of it. So that led to the problem now. And if antibiotics resistance keeps on going, and every year we're seeing more and more bacteria that can't be killed by our current antibiotics, we're going to have a huge problem. Because before antibiotics was around, lots of people died from bacterial infections. When a bacterial infection gets severe enough, when so many bacteria are in the body destroying, eating cells, releasing toxins, people die from that. Okay? So if we can make better decisions, then we can actually be more successful at controlling bacteria, curing bacterial infections, again, if we make the right decisions. I'm just going to drop this real quick, but talking about the ethics of doctors and looking at the decisions that they make, right now what we're actually seeing after President Trump name dropped a certain medicine that said could potentially cure or help treat the coronavirus, many doctors out there and this is really sad to say, many doctors out there started writing prescriptions for themselves and for their family members so that way they can get the cure, supposed cure, hasn't even been tested yet for, or fully tested yet for coronavirus. And the reason why I know this and I'm taking it kind of personally is my grandmother has lupus, and that medicine actually helps her in her battle with her lupus. So they're actually running out across the country. So making decisions about how we use medicines is really important, and we have to hope that our doctors have the moral center, the moral drive to actually do what's right. And that's antibiotics resistance too. All right, last things, want to end on a positive note here. So how we use bacteria. Bacteria is used by us personally. We have a symbiotic relationship in our intestines. So in our intestines, we have bacteria. One of the ones that you know probably the best is E. coli, and they help with digesting our food. If you were to take those bacteria out of our intestines, we would not fully digest our food, and we wouldn't get all the materials and nutrients we need out of our food. So we have that mutualistic symbiotic relationship with those bacteria to help us digest our food. Whenever you've taken antibiotics, if you read the outside, it says may cause diarrhea, upset stomach, stuff like that, because when you take the antibiotics, it doesn't necessarily target just that bacteria that's causing the infection that's hurting you. It targets all the bacteria in your body. So sometimes it kills the good bacteria in your gut, and that's why you have digestive problems while you're taking the antibiotic. We've used bacteria to make food. So cheeses are made with food a lot of the time, and yogurt. If you read the outside of a yogurt container, it actually says contains live cultures. So when you're eating yogurt, you're actually eating bacteria with it. And we even have things like Activa and stuff like that that are yogurt that purposely have the bacteria in it, which are probiotics, but the bacteria that help us with our digestion. And then for medicine, we've used genetic engineering to help bacteria make insulin for people who have diabetes. So we inserted the gene that it has instructions for making human insulin into bacteria, and then bacteria actually produce insulin, and we could collect that insulin, and people who have diabetes can inject that instead of what they used to inject, which was actually pig insulin, which is extremely similar to ours. And finally, the last thing, we're finding other cool uses for bacteria, which include things like oil spills. We've found some bacteria that when we put them on an oil spill, they actually start breaking up the oil. And this is really interesting because oil is toxic to almost all life, and yet these certain types of bacteria can actually break apart this toxic substance and help clean up the oil spill. Now, big ideas across all these videos that you should have gotten here. So first, bacteria and viruses are not the same. Big one right there. Most bacteria are decomposers, help life on our planet be possible. Pathogens, that's the word you want to know. Any bad bacteria is referred to as a pathogen. And then antibiotics only work on bacteria. Very important, because there have been people in the past that have tried to take antibiotics to help fight a virus. It does absolutely nothing. So in the case of coronavirus here, can't use antibiotics to help fight it off.